You ask me if I believe in miracles. That is a complicated question for a man of science. My name is Dr. Stefano Benedetti. For 28 years, I have walked the sterile corridors of the San Raffaele Hospital in Milan. I have worn the white coat like a second skin, a shield against the chaos of the natural world. I have served as the head of the pediatric infectious disease unit for nearly 3 decades. I have seen children die, and I have seen children recover, and until the autumn of 2024, I could always explain why. I could point to a chart, a blood test, a specific dosage of antibiotics, and say, this is why the fever broke. This is why the heart stopped. It was all cause and effect, a universe governed by biological rules that, while cruel, were at least consistent. But what happened in room 415 on the afternoon of October 10th, 2024, broke my understanding of the world. It wasn't just about Matteo Rossi, the boy no one wanted to touch. It wasn't just about a cure that defied every medical textbook I have ever read. It was about the 48 hours that followed, and the terrifying discovery that forced us to evacuate an entire floor of one of Italy's most prestigious hospitals. It was about how a dead boy, a teenager in jeans and sneakers, saved us from a catastrophe that could have devastated Milan. To understand the magnitude of that afternoon, you have to understand the darkness that preceded it. Matteo Rossi was 11 years old when he arrived at our emergency department in July of 2024. He came in with what looked like a standard, albeit severe, case of meningitis, high fever, stiff neck, sensitivity to light. We started him on the standard protocol immediately, but within 24 hours, it became clear that this was not a standard case. The laboratory results that came back from the pathology department sent a chill through the entire staff. Matteo was infected with a mutant strain of Neisseria meningitidis. It had genetic markers we had never seen before, mutations that rendered it completely impervious to our arsenal. We tried everything: vancomycin, meropenem, linezolid, daptomycin. We threw the strongest, most toxic antibiotics we had at this bacteria, and it didn't even slow down. The bacteria was eating him alive, and nothing we did made a difference. By the end of the first week, we had to isolate him. And I don't mean standard isolation. I mean total, level 4 biocontainment. We were terrified. The Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta were involved via video conference. They classified Matteo's condition as a potential threat to global public health. If this strain got out, if it traveled on a cough, a sneeze, or a contaminated surface, we were looking at a pandemic of an untreatable bacterial infection. So, we sealed Matteo in room 415 on the 4th floor. It became a prison of glass and negative pressure. For 3 months, that boy did not feel the skin of another human being. Before I continue with the details of those agonizing months, I have a quick question for you, just to take a brief pause from the intensity of this story. I am very curious to know who I am sharing this experience with. Where are you watching or reading this from? Please leave your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this narrative is resonating with you, if you feel the weight of what I am saying, please hit the subscribe button. It helps me immensely to keep sharing these experiences with all of you. Now back to room 415. Imagine being 11 years old. Imagine being in pain, confused and terrified. And imagine that every person who enters your room looks like a monster. That is what we looked like to him. To enter his room, I had to undergo a 20-minute decontamination process. I wore a Tyvek biological hazard suit, double N95 masks, a face shield, and triple layers of surgical gloves. I looked more like an astronaut than a doctor. I was one of only 3 people allowed inside: myself and 2 highly specialized nurses, Elena and Marco. We were the only human contact Matteo had, and we couldn't even offer him a comforting hand. The risk of transmission was too high. The protocol was absolute: minimum contact, maximum distance. We did what we had to do to keep him alive, changing IVs, checking vitals, and then we retreated. His parents, Giuseppe and Carlo, were living a nightmare. They spent every day in the observation anteroom, separated from their dying son by a pane of reinforced glass. They spoke to him through an intercom system. I watched them day after day, pressing their hands against the cold glass, weeping as Matteo begged them to come in. He would cry out, his voice weak and raspy, "Mama, please, just a hug, just hold my hand." As a father myself, it broke me. As a doctor, I had to be the villain. I had to tell Giuseppe and Carla over and over again, no. I had to explain that if they went in, they would likely die, and they would carry the bacteria out to the rest of the city. I was the gatekeeper of his isolation. I was the one ensuring that Matteo Rossi would die alone. By October, Matteo was deteriorating rapidly. He had developed severe hydrocephalus fluid on the brain. His neurological functions were shutting down. He was having seizures. He drifted in and out of consciousness. The boy was a skeleton, pale and fragile, connected to a forest of tubes and wires that beeped the rhythm of his fading life. On October 8th, his fever spiked to over 41 degrees Celsius. We were losing him. I told Giuseppe and Carla to prepare for the end. They begged me, on their knees, to let them go in for just 1 minute, just to kiss his forehead before he passed. It was the hardest decision of my life, but I refused. I couldn't risk the containment breach. I went home that night and drank half a bottle of whiskey, trying to drown the sound of that mother's pleading voice. Then came October 10th. The date is significant, though I didn't realize it at the moment. It was the second anniversary of the beatification of Carlo Acutis, the young computer programmer who died of leukemia. I knew of him. Of course, Italy is a Catholic country, and his story was everywhere, but I wasn't particularly devoted. I was a man of science, focused on the bacteria that was killing my patient, not on the saints who might save him. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. The ward was quiet. I was making my rounds, dreading the moment I had to enter room 415. I knew Matteo was close to death. I went through the decontamination airlock, putting on the suit, the mask, the gloves. The ritual was exhausting. I stepped through the second seal and into the room. The air in there was always cold, recycled through heavy HEPA filters, smelling of ozone and disinfectant. The only sound was the rhythmic hissing of the ventilator and the heart monitor. I looked at the chair beside the bed. It was supposed to be empty. It had been empty for 3 months, but it wasn't. There was a boy sitting there. He looked about 15 years old. He was wearing modern clothes, a pair of dark jeans, cool sneakers, and a polo shirt. He looked healthy, vibrant, completely out of place in this tomb of a room. And he was not wearing a suit. He wasn't wearing a mask. He wasn't wearing gloves. He was holding Matteo's hand. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. My first thought was that a visitor had broken in. A sibling, perhaps? A cousin? How had they gotten past security? How had they bypassed the airlocks? And then the terror set in. This unauthorized person was touching the patient. He was exposing himself to the most lethal bacteria in the hemisphere. "Stop!" I screamed. My voice was muffled by my double masks, but it was loud enough to echo in the small room. "Don't touch him! You are contaminating yourself! Get away from the patient immediately!" I rushed forward, my instinct to pull him away, warring with my fear of tearing the protective gear. The boy didn't flinch. He didn't jump. He simply turned his head and looked at me. He had a kind face, with dark, curly hair, and a smile that seemed to illuminate the sterile gloom of the room. He didn't look like an intruder. He looked peaceful. "Dr. Benedetti," he said. His voice was calm, clear, not muffled by the roar of the air scrubbers. "Do not worry." "Who are you?" I demanded, my heart hammering against my ribs. "How did you get in here? You are in grave danger. You need to leave now. We have to put you in quarantine." He kept holding Matteo's hand. Matteo, who had been comatose for 2 days, seemed to be sleeping peacefully now, his chest rising and falling in a natural rhythm I hadn't seen in weeks. I am Carlo Acutis, the boy said. I froze. The name registered, but it made no sense. That's not funny, I snapped. Carlo Acutis is dead. He died years ago. I died on October 12, 2006. The boy replied, as if stating a simple fact like the weather. I was 15. Leukemia. It was very fast. I died at San Gerardo Hospital in Monza. I was born in London in 1991. He spoke with such casual certainty. I stared at him, trying to find the trick. Was I hallucinating? Was this stress? A breakdown? I catalogued Eucharistic miracles, he continued, smiling at me. I loved computers. I used the internet to spread faith. But today, I am here for Matteo. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog. Listen to me, son. I don't know who you are, but this boy has a highly contagious drug-resistant bacteria. You are going to die if you stay here. Carlo laughed softly. It was a joyful sound, completely alien to this place of death. Doctor, Matteo will not die from this disease. Look at him. I looked down at the bed. The monitors were changing. The heart rate was stabilizing. The oxygen saturation levels, which had been hovering in the dangerous 80s, were climbing. 95%, 98%, 100%. In 48 hours, Carlo said, his tone shifting, becoming more serious. You will discover that the bacteria is gone from his body, but you will also discover something else, something you need to know to save the others. What others? I asked, bewildered. The ventilation system, Carlo said. He pointed upward, toward the ceiling vents. The strain did not just mutate in Matteo, it has been breeding in the dampeners of the HVAC unit for the 4th floor. A maintenance technician, a man named Roberto, he cut corners 3 months ago. He didn't change the filters, he didn't sanitize the ducts, he falsified the logs. I stared at him. How could you possibly know that? The bacteria is circulating, Carlo said. It has been in the air for 12 weeks, but the incubation period is ending. In 48 hours, it will manifest in other patients. You must evacuate the floor. You must close it for 6 weeks. If you do not, 47 people will be infected, and many will not survive. This is impossible, I whispered. Our protocols fail when people are negligent, Carlo said gently. Then he stood up. He was taller than I expected. He looked at Matteo one last time and brushed a hand over the boy's forehead. He is fine now. He can hug his mother. Wait, I said, reaching out. You can't just leave. I need to... I blinked. In the time it took for my eyelids to close and open, he was gone. There was no sound of a door opening, no rush of air. The chair was empty. The room was exactly as it had been, except for one thing. Matteo Rossi opened his eyes. He looked at me, his eyes clear, the glassy fever haze gone. He pulled off his oxygen mask with a strength he shouldn't have had. Doctor? He asked. Matteo. I gasped, rushing to his side, checking the monitors. Everything was normal. His temperature, which was 41 degrees an hour ago, was 36.6. Normal. The boy with the glasses, Matteo said, his voice raspy but strong. He was nice. He said I'm all better. He said I can hug Mama now. I didn't know what to do. My medical training was screaming that this was impossible. Spontaneous remission of this magnitude doesn't happen. But the boy was sitting up. The stiffness in his neck was gone. He was asking for water. I triggered the emergency alert, not for a code blue, but for immediate assistance. I stripped off my gear in the airlock faster than I ever had before. I ordered a full battery of tests. Blood, spinal fluid, swabs, everything. Giuseppe and Carlo were banging on the glass, terrified by my frantic movements. I turned on the intercom. He's awake, I told them, tears streaming down my face. He's awake, and I think he's okay. The next 6 hours were a blur of confusion. The lab technicians ran the tests 3 times because they thought the machines were broken. 0 bacterial load. The Neisseria meningitidis was gone. Not dormant. Gone. It was as if it had never been there. By 9:12 p.m., I allowed Giuseppe and Carla into the room. They wore masks just in case. But when they hugged their son, and he hugged them back with strength, I knew the danger for him was over. But the fear in my gut was just beginning. I couldn't shake the words of the boy of Carlo. The ventilation system. The maintenance technician. 48 hours. I was the head of the department. I had authority. But how could I order a massive investigation based on the words of a ghost? I would be laughed out of the medical board. They would revoke my license. However, the specificity of the detail haunted me. Roberto. Falsified logs. The next morning, October 11th, I went to the facilities management office. I asked to see the maintenance logs for the 4th floor HVAC system from July. The manager looked at me strangely but pulled up the files. Who signed off on the maintenance on July 15th? I asked. The manager squinted at the screen. Looks like Roberto Ricci. Why? I felt the blood drain from my face. Is he here today? No, he was fired 2 weeks ago. Caught him faking safety certificates for the fire suppression system. The coincidence was too precise. My heart was racing. If Carlo was right about the technician, he was right about the bacteria. I need an emergency containment team to swab the main outflow ducts of the 4th floor, I ordered. The manager laughed. Dr. Benedetti, that requires shutting down the AC. It's expensive. I need authorization from the director. Do it! I snarled, slamming my hand on the desk. Or I will call the Ministry of Health and tell them we are harboring a biological hazard. Do it now! They did it. It took 4 hours. At 2:00 p.m. on October 11th, the preliminary cultures from the ventilation ducts came back. Positive. Neisseria meningitidis, the mutant strain. It was everywhere. It was in the dust, in the filters, in the condensation pans. The entire 4th floor was being showered with microscopic particles of the bacteria every time the air conditioner kicked on. I called an emergency meeting with the hospital director. I showed him the results. I didn't tell him about the ghost. I didn't tell him about Carlo. I told him I had a hunch, a suspicion based on Matteo's case. We have to evacuate, I said. We have 47 immunocompromised children on that floor. If this hits them, they will die. The director was hesitant. Evacuating a whole floor? The logistics are a nightmare. The press will be filming the coffins if we don't. I interrupted. We began the preparations, but we were running out of time. Carlo had said 48 hours from his visit. That deadline was approaching. On the morning of October 12th, exactly 48 hours after I saw Carlo Acutis in room 415, the nightmare began. A 6-year-old girl in room 402 spiked a fever, then a boy in 408, then a teenager in 420. Within 2 hours, 8 patients on the 4th floor were showing signs of early-onset meningitis. The prophecy was fulfilling itself with terrifying accuracy. But because I had pushed for the investigation, because I had listened to the impossible warning, we were ready. We had isolation teams on standby. We had the transfer ambulances waiting. Code Orange, evacuation of 4th floor. This is not a drill. The voice over the PA system was calm, but the activity was frantic. We moved 47 sick children in a convoy of sterility. We took them to the isolation wing of the Fate Benefratelli Hospital and our own overflow units. We started prophylactic antibiotic treatments immediately for everyone who had been on that floor, using a new experimental cocktail we had developed during Matteo's treatment, just in case. Because we caught it at the very first symptom, because we knew exactly what we were looking for. We saved them. All 8 children who showed symptoms recovered. The other 39 never developed the disease. We sealed the 4th floor. It remained closed for 6 weeks. It was stripped to the concrete. We used ultraviolet radiation robots, ozone gas fumigation, and chemical scrubbing that stripped the paint off the walls. The ventilation system was completely ripped out and replaced. When the investigation into Roberto Ricci was completed, the police found that he had indeed skipped the July cleaning. He had been suffering from a drug addiction and had merely signed the papers without opening the vent covers. Inside the ducts, they found a perfect breeding ground of moisture and heat, where the bacteria from patient zero Matteo had been sucked in and allowed to mutate and multiply for months. It was a biological bomb waiting to detonate, and it would have killed dozens, perhaps hundreds, if it hadn't been discovered that day. Matteo Rossi was discharged 2 weeks later. He walked out of the hospital on his own 2 legs. The neurological damage? Gone. The hydrocephalus? Resolved. He is a normal, happy boy. I still work at San Rafael. I am still a man of science. I still read journals and attend conferences. But I keep a picture in my office now. It's not a medical diagram. It's a small prayer card of a smiling teenager in a polo shirt, sitting on a rock, looking at the sky. Matteo and I have become close. He visits the hospital, not as a patient, but as a friend. He started a blog, Matteo and Carlo, where he writes about his life. He tells other sick kids that they aren't alone. He goes to Assisi regularly to visit the tomb of the boy who touched his hand. Sometimes, late at night, when the hospital is quiet, I walk past room 415. It's occupied by another child now, a broken leg, nothing serious. But I stop and look at the chair. Carlo Acutis taught me that medicine is a powerful tool, but it is not the only power in the universe. He taught me that sometimes the cure doesn't come from a pill. Sometimes it comes from a visit. He saved Matteo to save the others. He used the miracle of one boy to reveal the danger threatening many. It was the most efficient, programmatic way to solve the problem. Just like a programmer fixing a bug in the code, he patched the system. I often wonder why I was the one allowed to see him. Maybe because I was the one who needed to act. Or maybe, just maybe, because even a skeptical old doctor needs to be reminded that there are things in this world that cannot be explained, only accepted with gratitude. Hey, a quick pause before we finish. I would love to know where you are connecting from today. Leave a comment with your location. It is always incredible to see how this community grows all over the world. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. Your support means everything and helps me keep telling stories that really matter. So, do I believe in miracles? I look at the empty 4th floor, now clean and safe. I look at Matteo Rossi playing soccer in the park. Yes, I do. But life, as I have learned, does not simply stop after a miracle. It continues in the mundane details, in the paperwork, and in the quiet reverberations of the event. Following the reopening of the 4th floor, the hospital administration launched a silent but thorough internal inquiry. They wanted to understand how I knew to check the ventilation ducts. I sat before a board of 12 directors, men and women of logic and stature, and I told them the truth. I told them about the boy in the jeans and sneakers. I told them about the conversation regarding the technician, Roberto. The room was silent for a long time. They looked at my service record, my 28 years of unblemished medical practice, and then they looked at each other. In the end, they chose to redact the mention of Carlo Acutis from the official report. The official record states that Dr. Benedetti, acting on clinical intuition and a review of maintenance irregularities, ordered an emergency inspection. They sanitized the miracle just as we had sanitized the walls of the ward. They preserved my reputation, but they buried the truth. I did not fight them. I knew that faith is not something that can be filed in a dossier or published in The Lancet. However, the atmosphere in the pediatric infectious disease unit changed. The nurses who had been there, Elena and Marco, they knew. They had seen Matteo's vitals shift on the monitors. We never spoke of it openly during rounds, but there was a new unspoken protocol. When a child was critical, when science had hit its wall, We no longer just checked the machines. We allowed space for the inexplicable. We allowed parents to pray without the condescending glances of the medical staff. Matteo kept his promise to live a full life. Every year on October 10th, he returns to San Rafael. He is 16 now, taller than me, with the beginnings of a beard and a voice that cracks with adolescence. He brings pastries for the nurses and sits in the waiting room, talking to the parents of the new patients. He tells them his story, not the sanitized version, but the real one. He shows them the scar on his neck from the central line, a fading reminder of the battle he won. He has become a beacon of hope in a place that is often drowning in despair. One afternoon, about a year after the evacuation, I found myself walking through the hospital chapel. It is a small, modern space, usually empty. I am not a man who prays often, but that day I felt a pull. I sat in the back row and looked at the altar. To the side, someone had placed a small, framed photograph of Carlo Acutis. It was the same image I see on the internet, the same face that had looked at me in room 415. I thought about what he had said to me about being a programmer, about bugs in the system. It made me realize that perhaps the divide between science and faith is not a canyon, but a circuit. Medicine is the hardware. We fix the bones, the blood, the organs. But the software, the soul, the will to live, the connections that bind us, that operates on a code we have yet to decipher. Carlo had simply debugged the room. He saw a fatal error in the ventilation and a fatal error in Matteo's body, and he rewrote the script. I have retired from the position of department head, though I still consult on difficult cases. The stress of the administration was too much, and I wanted to spend more time writing, more time sharing these stories with you. The world is getting louder, more chaotic, and more cynical. We look for answers in data streams and algorithms, forgetting that sometimes the most important messages come in silence from a visitor who shouldn't be there. The fourth floor is busy today. The hum of the ventilation system is steady and safe. The filters changed religiously every month. The air is clean. Children are being treated with the best medicine humanity has to offer. But in the drawer of the desk at the nurse's station, tucked beneath the shift schedules, there is a holy card of a boy in a polo shirt. It is our backup generator. It is our reminder that while we treat the body, we must never ignore the mysteries that surround it. So, when you walk into a hospital, when you see the white coats and the sterile lights, remember that there is more happening than what is written on the charts. There are guardians in the gaps between the atoms. There are programmers in the clouds, and sometimes, if you are very lucky, or perhaps very desperate, the impossible walks through the door wearing sneakers. Thank you for listening to my story. It is a burden and a gift to carry it. I hope it gives you something to hold on to when the night is dark and the fever is high. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. I clicked the stop button on the recording interface. The red light on the microphone faded, plunging the room back into the dim, amber illumination of my desk lamp. The digital hum of the computer fan was the only sound left in the office, a modern hearth for a modern storyteller. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the friction of age and memory. Telling the story always drained me, pulling me back to the cold sweat of the decontamination suit and the sterile terror of room 415. But it was a necessary exhaustion. It was the price of witnessing. I stood up and grabbed my coat. The hospital corridors were different at night. The frantic, fluorescent energy of the day shift dissolved into a rhythmic, hushed vigilance. I walked past the nurse's station on the 4th floor. Elena was there, older now, her hair streaked with silver that matched my own. She looked up from a tablet and nodded to me, a silent acknowledgement shared between soldiers who survived the same war. We did not speak of ghosts in the hallways, but I noticed she still checked the humidity sensors on the wall with a diligence that bordered on religious fervor. I made my way to the exit, intending to go home, to sleep, to let the science of the world resume its logical procession. But as I stepped through the automatic sliding doors into the cool Milanese night, I stopped. The parking lot was bathed in the orange glow of sodium lights, and the air smelled of wet asphalt and autumn leaves. Leaning against my car was a figure I knew better than my own reflection. Matteo was waiting for me. He was no longer the fragile skeleton I had fought to keep in this world. He was 17 now, broad-shouldered, wearing a leather jacket that smelled of rain and youth. He was holding a helmet. His scooter was parked next to my sedan. He looked up as I approached, his eyes catching the light. "You're working late, Doc," he said, his voice a deep baritone that still surprised me every time I heard it. "Old habits," I replied, leaning against the car beside him. "And you? Shouldn't you be studying? Or causing trouble?" I was nearby. Matteo shrugged, looking up at the hospital tower, counting the illuminated windows where other battles were currently being waged. I felt like I needed to come by, just to check on the server status. He grinned, using the terminology we had both adopted since that day. "The system is stable," I assured him, smiling back. "All patches applied." We stood in silence for a moment. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between two people who have stared into the abyss and watched it blink first. Then Matteo reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It looked old, worn at the edges, the paper soft from years of handling. "I found this in my old notebook," he said softly. "I wrote it the day before he came. The day before Carlo. I was writing a goodbye letter to my parents." My heart tightened in my chest. "Matteo, you don't have to." "No," he interrupted gently. "I want you to have it. Not because of what it says, but because of what it isn't. It isn't a suicide note anymore. It's just a draft, a corrupted file that never got executed." He handed me the paper. "You were the firewall, Stefano. You and him. You kept the virus out long enough for the update to install." I took the paper. My hands, which had performed thousands of delicate procedures, were trembling slightly. I looked at the boy, the man standing before me. The medical chart said he survived because of a spontaneous remission and an aggressive evacuation protocol. The heart said he survived because a 15-year-old gamer from heaven decided to debug the 4th floor of San Rafael Hospital. "I am retiring next week," I admitted, the words tasting strange on my tongue. "For real this time. No more consulting, no more boards." Matteo smiled, and for a split second, the sodium light hit his face in a way that superimposed another face over Hisa boy with curly hair and a polo shirt. The resemblance was not physical, but spiritual. It was the look of someone who knows the end of the code. "You're not retiring, Doc," Matteo said, climbing onto his scooter and kicking the starter. The engine roared to life, shattering the quiet of the parking lot. "You're just uploading to the cloud. You've got stories to tell." He pulled on his helmet, the visor clicking shut. "See you around, Stefano. Drive safe," I called out, the automatic warning of a physician escaping my lips. He revved the engine and sped off into the dark, a streak of red tail lights merging with the traffic of the living city. I stood there until he was gone, just another young man with a future that shouldn't have existed. I looked down at the paper in my hand, then up at the night sky. The clouds had parted, revealing a constellation of stars, a vast, complex network of light that had traveled millions of years to reach my retina. I thought of the bacteria in the vents. I thought of the boy in the chair. I thought of the probability of it all, the impossible, beautiful math of mercy. I put the paper in my pocket, right next to the prayer card I always carried. I unlocked my car and got in. The engine started with a hum. I turned on the radio, and static filled the cabin for a moment before resolving into a clear, strong signal. A song I didn't know, full of drums and life. "I am Dr. Stefano Benedetti. I am a man of science." And as I drove out of the gates of San Raffaele, leaving the sterile white fortress behind me for the last time, I finally understood that science is simply the language we use to describe the miracle, letter by letter, until the code finally makes sense. The screen goes dark. The file is saved. The story continues. The cursor blinked on the screen for a moment before I closed the laptop, plunging the room into the absolute silence of a Milanese autumn night. The story was told. The video was uploaded. My digital confession was now drifting through the servers of the world, a packet of data indistinguishable from cat videos and news reports, yet carrying the weight of a life's work. But as I sat there in the darkness, I realized that telling the story was not enough. The narrative had a beginning and a middle, but for me, the man who had touched the edge of the impossible, it lacked a final punctuation mark. 3 days later, I found myself on a train speeding south through the Umbrian countryside. The green hills rolled by like the gentle breaths of a sleeping giant, a stark contrast to the sharp, sterile angles of the San Rafael Hospital. I was not wearing my white coat. I was wearing a simple wool jacket and walking shoes. In my pocket, I carried 2 things: the worn prayer card of Carlo Acutis and my hospital identification badge, the plastic rectangle that had defined my existence for nearly 40 years. I arrived in Assisi just as the sun was beginning its descent, casting a golden halo over the stone basilica of St. Francis. But my destination was not the great basilica on the hill. I navigated the winding cobblestone streets toward the sanctuary of the spoliation, the church of Santa Maria Maggiore. It was a humble place compared to the grand cathedrals of Rome, yet the air here felt different, thicker, perhaps, or charged with a static electricity that did not register on any Geiger counter. I entered the sanctuary. It was quiet, smelling of beeswax and ancient stone. I walked down the side aisle toward the tomb. I had seen pictures, of course. I had read the descriptions. But the man of science in me needed the empirical evidence. I needed to see the data point with my own eyes. There he was, Carlo Acutis. The body was displayed behind glass, preserved with a serenity that defied the decay of death. But it wasn't the preservation that stopped my heart. It was the attire. He was not dressed in the flowing robes of a medieval saint or the vestments of the clergy. He was wearing jeans, he was wearing a fleece jacket, and on his feet he wore a pair of Nike sneakers. I gripped the railing, my knuckles turning white. They were the same sneakers, the exact same tread, the exact same lace pattern I had seen under the harsh fluorescent lights of room 415. The boy who had sat in the contamination chair, the boy who had bypassed my airlocks, was lying here in repose. The impossibility of it washed over me. But this time, it brought no fear, only a profound, vibrating clarity. I stood there for a long time, a doctor analyzing a patient he could not cure, a patient who had instead cured him. I thought of the ventilation ducts, the bacteria, the algorithms of biology that I had worshipped as gods. They were real, yes, but they were merely the syntax of a programming language I was only just beginning to read. Carlo had not broken the laws of physics. He had simply utilized a higher operating system. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my hospital ID. It had my name, Dr. Stefano Benedetti, and my title, Head of Pediatric Infectious Diseases. It was the symbol of my authority, my logic, my shield against the chaos. Slowly I placed the badge on the small ledge in front of the glass tomb. It was a surrender. It was an acknowledgement that while I had spent my life fighting death, this boy in sneakers had conquered it. Code compiled. I whispered, a faint smile touching my lips. System stable. I turned to leave, feeling lighter than I had in decades. As I walked toward the heavy wooden doors of the church, a young man bumped into me. He was rushing in, holding a smartphone, looking for the tomb. He apologized profusely in broken Italian. He looked frantic, worried, perhaps carrying the burden of a sick relative or a lost hope. It's okay, I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. The gesture was instinctive, the muscle memory of 1,000 rounds in the ward. Go to him. He listens. The young man looked at me, surprised by the certainty in my voice. You are a priest? No, I replied, opening the door to let the Umbrian sunlight flood the vestibule. I am just a retired technician. I used to fix the hardware. He fixes the software. I walked out into the square. The birds were singing, oblivious to miracles and medicine alike. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool air. I would go home now. I would plant a garden. I would watch Matteo Rossi grow up. And when my own time came, when the final monitor beeped and the screen faded to black, I would not be afraid. I knew now that the end of the program was not an error. It was simply the moment the user decided to save the file. I looked up at the sky, a vast blue expanse free of ceilings and ventilation shafts. Thank you, I said to the empty air. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need a response to know I had been heard. The file was saved. The story was complete. Time, I have found, is not a straight line drawn by a drafting pencil, but a code that loops and repeats, executing similar functions with different variables. 10 years have passed since I left my badge on the ledge of that tomb in Assisi. 10 years of quiet mornings in my garden. 10 years of watching the seasons turn the green hills of Lombardy into white, silent landscapes and back again. The video I recorded that night, the story of the boy in sneakers, was viewed by millions, then forgotten by most, as is the nature of the digital age. But for a select few, it became a kernel of hope, a patch for their own corrupted files. I am 82 years old now. The heart that once raced with the adrenaline of emergency codes is now tired. It beats with a syncopated rhythm, a glitch in the hardware that no amount of medication can fully debug. It is ironic, perhaps, that the man who spent a lifetime fighting infections is now succumbing to the simple, inevitable wear of the machine. I find myself back at San Rafael, not as the conductor of the orchestra, but as the audience. I am lying in a bed on the 4th floor, though not in room 415. That room belongs to the children, and I am merely an old man waiting for the final shutdown. The window is open, letting in the sounds of the city I saved, or helped to save, all those years ago. I am drifting, the edges of my vision blurring, the data stream of my consciousness fragmenting. The nurses are kind, though they do not know me as the legend of the department, only as the fragile patient in bed 12. They check my vitals, adjust the drip, and speak in hushed tones about oxygen saturation and ejection fractions. It is a language I speak fluently, but it no longer interests me. I am waiting for something else. The door opens, and the light from the hallway cuts a sharp rectangle across the dim floor. A man enters. He is tall, wearing a white coat that fits him perfectly, a stethoscope draped around his neck like a stole. He has a thick beard now, and lines of fatigue around his eyes, the marks of a physician who takes his burden seriously. He picks up my chart, reads it, and then looks at me. "Hello, Stefano," Dr. Matteo Rossi says. I try to smile, but the muscles of my face are heavy. "You look tired, Matteo. You're working too hard." "Just a double shift," he replies, pulling a chair close to my bed. He sits down, disregarding the sterile distance I once enforced so strictly. He takes my hand. His grip is warm, solid, living proof of the impossible. "I wanted to be here. The team said it wouldn't be long now." "It is time," I whisper. My voice is a dry rasp, like leaves blowing over concrete. The system is obsolete. No more updates available. Matteo laughs softly, a sound that reminds me of the boy who once defied a lethal bacteria. "You taught me everything about medicine, Stefano, but you also taught me when to put the charts away." He squeezes my hand. "Do you remember? The boy with the backpack? The programmer? I remember. I breathe. Every day. He's here. Matteo says, his voice thick with emotion. In the work we do. In every kid who walks out of those doors. You didn't just save me, Doc. You rebooted the whole unit. We treat the soul first now. The body follows. My breath is becoming shallow. The monitor beside me is beeping a slow, final cadence. It is not frightening. It feels like the cursor blinking at the end of a sentence, waiting for the period. I look at Matteo, and for a moment the years peel away. I see the 11-year-old boy, pale and dying, and I see the man he has become. The loop is closed. The code has executed perfectly. Matteo, I say, gathering the last of my strength. Don't let them become just mechanics. Keep looking for the glitches. I promise, he says, tears spilling onto his cheeks. Rest now, Stefano. The shift is over. I close my eyes. The sounds of the hospital fade, the beeping, the distant sirens, the hum of the ventilation system I once feared. The darkness is not empty. It is textured, like the deep blue of a computer screen before the interface loads. And then, I see him. He is standing in the corner of the room, just as he did on that October afternoon. He is not wearing robes or wings. He is wearing jeans, a fleece jacket, and those Nike sneakers. He is leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, a relaxed, knowing smile on his face. He looks at his wrist, checking a watch that isn't there, and then nods at me. Dr. Benedetti, Carlo says. His voice is clear, bypassing my failing ears and speaking directly to the spark that is left of me. Your user session is complete. The upload is ready. I feel a lightness spreading through my chest, the pain dissolving into code, the fear turning into data. I look back at my body on the bed, at Matteo holding the hand of a shell that is no longer me. I feel a profound sense of gratitude, not for the science that extended my life, but for the mystery that gave it meaning. Is the system stable? I ask the boy. Carlo pushes off the wall and extends a hand toward me. The network is infinite, Stefano, and the connection is perfect. Come. We have a lot of work to do. There are many bugs to fix. I reach out. My hand, no longer trembling, no longer old, grasps his. The grip is firm. The transition is instantaneous. The monitor in the room goes flat, a singular high-pitched tone that marks the end of a biological process. Dr. Matteo Rossi stands up, wipes his eyes, and gently pulls the sheet over the face of his mentor. He stays for a moment in the silence, then reaches into his pocket and pulls out a worn prayer card. He places it on the bedside table, beside the cold stethoscope. He walks to the window and looks out at the Milanese sky, where the first stars of the evening are beginning to boot up. One by one, a vast, luminous array of light against the darkness. Thank you, Matteo whispers to the room, to the sky, to the silence. He turns off the lights and walks out the door, ready to start his rounds, ready to search for the next miracle in the gaps between the atoms. The file is closed. The story is eternal.